Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Hello, everybody. 7:15 in Ireland. It's good to be here. It's good to have you here today with us. I hope you are ready for our second part of Tanya's talk, and she's giving us a beautiful overview and tips about how to develop bright minds, healthy minds. So it's much needed at this time, and I hope these teachings is kind of help you somehow. And before she starts, she will do a very quickly summary of what we saw on Tuesday, and then she will start talking about the following habits for this week. Okay, so thank you very much again, especially our friends from Ireland, from UK, from Portugal, from Poland, and our dear friends from America. And I just want to say thank you to BUSS, to sharing this stream with us, and Kardec Radio for giving us this opportunity. So, Tanya, welcome again. Thank you very much for your availability. Despite our friends in US under 25 inches of snow.
Wow.
Okay, Don, you're gonna build a igloo for you, no? Yeah, it's, my gosh. I know it's snow in Texas again. I don't know if Linda is here with us, she can confirm. But I heard this morning during my business meeting, it's snowing again in Texas. So take care of yourself, my friend. I hope you have yourself plenty of food, water, and be okay. No?
May there be much solidarity, people helping each other out. That much snow, it's hard to do snow angels. But I hope when the time is right that there can be fun had with the snow, particularly for kids as well. Yes. They can turn something that could be an adversity into something that could be quite fun. But not to belittle what people may be going through, particularly if they've lost power. So I hope there's much solidarity,
Yes.
people helping each other out. So
yeah, it is.
So just to pick up on where we left off, Stevan, thank you very much for that introduction.
Let's do our initial prayer.
Oh, sorry, apologies,
Yeah.
sorry.
So I'm gonna ask everyone to have a deep breath if you can, and make connection with superior spirits. Rise up your thoughts to them. Ask them to allow these messages reach as much as people in the world, especially those friends who speak in English, and may these teachings of today will give some relief to the parents. Please look after our speaker today. May Tanya be inspired by the superior spirits in order to deliver the right message. Also, these thoughts may reach our friends who are sick, who are suffering with the cold, those who are hungry, suffering from anxiety. May our thoughts be with them. So be it. Amen. Okay, Tanya, it's all yours. Do you want me to put up the deck here?
Please, yeah, from slide 10. Thank you.
Okay. So, I'm in the background here. If you need me, call me.
Will do. So, just to recap, in case anybody is missed the first part of this on Tuesday, the backbone of this talk is effectively focusing in on a book that I read recently that I loved, called The Silent Guides by Professor Steve Peters, and it's based on 10 mental habits that he has distilled in his, I think, 25-year plus professional career, that could effectively be great protective factors for the mind of children. He's done a considerable amount of work as a psychiatrist with adults and with children. And so this is for parents and caregivers and teachers of children to help them to start developing healthier and happier minds for the child for life. Incidentally, these habits can be learned at any stage of life, and I think are equally as relevant towards adults. The companion book for the child is My Hidden Chimp, so that's the one for the kids, and the one for the adults is The Silent Guides. So as I read the book, I was struck by how much it overlaps with an awful lot of ideas that we see repeatedly in Spiritist literature. And so I just wanted to combine this cutting edge thinking within psychology and neuroscience and link it in with Spiritist thinking to be a support to parents and caregivers. And so, just to repeat, he does mention that it's important for the parents and caregivers to make time out to care for themselves while they're caring for the kids, to become their own biggest fan and not their worst critic, as again a way of minding themselves to be better able to help the child. Whenever possible, take a change of scenery, mix with others to recharge the batteries to be able to come back replenished. Exercise if there's time, which for young parents can be really challenging. And to create a happiness list. Investing in the happiness of the parent is investing in the happiness of the child as well. Creating a happier atmosphere is really positive for the child. So making a list of things that make the caregiver happy and implementing them, again, as much as is possible. So moving on to the next slide, please, Stevan, we can see the 10 healthy habits, of which we discussed 3 on Tuesday. And, you know, instinctively they all make sense. Smiling seems probably to some who weren't there on Tuesday, it could seem superficial, but he gets into the evidence base behind this, research showing the impact that smiling has on the feelings, the emotions, and on things like blood pressure and heart rate of people that smile. It drops. So there's physiological as well as mental health benefits. It also has a contagious effect and is very positive for relationships. Talks about teaching the child to learn how to say sorry, to learn to be humble effectively and recognize when they make a mistake, to say sorry, to look to do something kind to make up for it, and thirdly, to learn from the mistake so they don't repeat it, something that is repeated as well in Spiritist literature. And then thirdly, being kind. He gives some lovely examples of kindness to instill the habit of kindness in children, whether it's to be encouraging, to be appreciative, to be grateful, to be giving and sharing, to be considerate of the feelings of others. So he gives some lovely examples, and of course that very much overlaps with the teachings of Spiritism, where the language often that's used is to be charitable. So whether we say kind or charitable, I think it effectively is talking about the same thing. And so we're going to pick up from there to talk about the other habits. So if we move on, Stevan, to the next slide, to habit 4, talking about your feelings, which I think is something that many can struggle with. And effectively, he's encouraging the development of emotional literacy in the child from a very young age, to normalize and educate the child on being able to be free in expressing their feelings. So before I move on, again, for those maybe who didn't, who weren't there on Tuesday, he presents a framework that is a classification of the brain that's based on neuroscience. So the brain, the mind has three systems that interconnect and influence each other. One is the human brain, which is the rational, logical, conscious part of our mind. It's the most up-to-date part of our thinking. It's the real us, as he would say. So if we look at it in software terms, it's like it's the most recent software upgrade that we have. The second part is the chimp, the chimpanzee. It's reactive, it's emotional, it's impulsive. So rather than thinking things through, it rapidly reacts to situations and tends to overreact to situations. So it's like the unconscious mind, the inner child. And that tends to dominate in the mind of children. And often for some adults as well, and for all of us at different times. And then the third part is the computer, which is a memory bank. It's the store of memories and beliefs that remind the chimp and the human of previous experiences and knowledge that have been programmed into the computer that leads us to think in certain ways and behave in certain ways instinctively. So it's full of learned behaviors and beliefs that come from previous experiences, from our family, from the culture that we grew up in, from the peers that we mix with. And from a Spiritist perspective, we would add to that, you could argue, that come from previous lifetimes. So effectively, what you're trying to do is get the human to learn to manage the chimp by upgrading the beliefs and the behaviors that are stored within the computer, so that the chimp is not the one that's running the show, but instead the human gradually over time begins to build up a memory bank of beliefs and behaviors that are as mature as the behaviors that an adult would wish to have. So putting it in that framework, he basically in terms of talking about one's feelings, he says it's important to allow the child's chimp to vent its feelings, to express its feelings, preferably out loud, to help gain perspective and to stabilize the mind. So it allows the human part of the brain to listen and to process what is happening. So not to suppress the feelings, not to pretend they're not there, but to actually allow them out, obviously in a safe way, in a safe space, with the right people. Because the human part of the mind has not yet been fully developed in the child, the adult, the caregiver, the parent can be the human for the child's chimp. So they can be the external moderator of the child's chimp. And they can do that in the following way: listening compassionately, listening to understand what the child is perceiving is happening, because what they perceive is happening and what is actually happening could be different things. With compassion, showing the child that they've understood, so acknowledging their feelings, validating their feelings, helping and encouraging the child to talk about their fears and their concerns, so to be open about what they are worried about, and where possible to remove these. Find out what conclusions the child may have reached and alter these conclusions to something more helpful if these conclusions are incorrect. So the child may have a disproportionate reaction to something, or an incorrect reaction to something, and it's not to ridicule their feelings or ignore their feelings. It's to acknowledge, to listen, and to help them to think more clearly. And in doing that, the computer of the child will gradually be updated to more mature understanding of situations. And also helping the child to find a way to move forward, to move on from the situation. So repeatedly he makes this point in the book in various chapters, so I will do the same. is how important it is that no matter what fear or worry the child has, it's important to take these worries seriously, because it is important for the child. He goes on to say that if a child finds it hard to talk about their feelings, then options to help them could include normalizing it, telling them that many children find it difficult to talk about their feelings, and that's okay. They're not alone. Perhaps explore using art or play as a way of expressing themselves. So, for example, they could draw a painting to tell the story of what's happened and then describe it through the painting, or use toys as a way to tell the story. Another could be doing an activity while talking about what has happened. So going for a walk, cooking, playing a game. So there's less pressure on the child to open up about what's happened. It's a more indirect way. Another could be to suggest to the child, imagine that the child is their own best friend, and that the best friend is describing what has happened, and is describing how they're feeling, and to imagine if this happened to another boy or girl, to describe what happened. So again, it's kind of putting them into the position of being more removed from it and emotionally feeling safer to be able to open up and talk about their feelings. From a Spiritist perspective, we know that we're immortal spirits who are born back into new bodies, new incarnations, and that we've had multiple lifetimes before this, and we have many more in front of us. So in the body of the child is a spirit who has an accumulation of experiences and skills, and some will be more advanced than others. They may be more advanced intellectually and less so emotionally or socially, or vice versa. And so there will be disparities in terms of the emotional intelligence. And so each child within the family would need to be treated individually, recognizing that they will have had completely different backgrounds and experiences and skill sets, spiritually speaking. So meeting them where they are and seeing where their needs are. So for some children within the family, it may be easier to express themselves. For others, it may be much more difficult because of the cultural upbringing or the experiences that they've had before. So treat each child individually would be the thought. And so then going back to Professor Peters, because I want to be clear in delineating what his thinking is and what comes from Spiritism. So back to Professor Peters, is he suggests to ask the child what would help and how to improve things. They would know what would help them to feel better. He makes a very valid point that it is incredibly important to ring-fence time, protected time with the child that is absolutely sacrosanct, to develop a close bond with the child, to bring the child closer to the adult, to develop a habit of talking things through, and becoming more at ease with talking about their feelings and what's been happening. And so if it is difficult for the child, then he suggests an easy way to start that is just asking how the day went. What would they like to do at the weekend? So keeping it, again, not too pressured, but just sort of gently making that connection, opening the space to be present and to listen to the child. And again, looking at this from a Spiritist perspective, this is a point that's made very strongly in the books by Joanna de Angelis, The Spirit Guide of Divaldo Franco, where particularly in the book Family Constellations, she talks about how important it is for parents to develop a habit of making time to really get to know what's going on with their kids and to take an interest in their lives and to be there for them when the inevitable challenges of life arise. She speaks in particular about around the family table, the dinner table, as an ideal time for people to talk about their day and to share, so that those relationships are built, that the channels of communication are developed and opened and are flowing, so that when a challenge arises, that the relationships are already there. She goes on to say that this in turn could help avoid a child turning to lean on poor coping mechanisms such as drugs or alcohol as a way of managing difficult feelings as they hit challenging situations, for example, in their teens or in their early 20s. So building that connection and building that emotional literacy potentially could prevent a lot of suffering down the line for that child as they start to move towards adulthood. So back to Professor Peters, he then opens up about managing guilt, which is a very strong emotion. And he basically says that beating ourselves up and holding on to guilt is a very destructive mental habit. And from a Spiritist perspective, we know that this can have very unpleasant consequences spiritually, as it can put us onto a much lower wavelength, and it opens doors energetically to spirits who are also on a lower wavelength, who may wish us harm or may wish to hinder our progress. So spirits who we may have had issues with in the past, for example, may use guilt to exploit our thinking and as a way of holding us back or interfering with our lives. So guilt, Professor Peters goes on to say, if we hold on to it, guilt can become a source of poor self-esteem and of depression. It has a positive purpose, which is to alert us to the fact that we may have done something wrong, or we could have prevented something from happening, or that we have been negligent. So it has a positive purpose. It's there to alert us to do something about it, to take action. And so managing guilt, he says, he informs us, is to firstly accept it, to acknowledge it, and to appreciate we all make mistakes, which in effect is humility, that we all make mistakes from time to time. Our chimp, remember that unconscious inner child within us, the immature part of us, may have hijacked our thinking and behavior, for example. And so we can apologize and, if possible, do something kind to compensate for what we've done or what we failed to do. If we can't do anything about it, then we can turn it into a lesson and look to learn to do differently in the future, but not to hold on to it. And again, here I mentioned on Tuesday, the exercise outlined in the Gospel According to Spiritism by St. Augustine is how helpful in his lifetime he found it to reflect on his conscience before he went to sleep, to look back on his day and do an evaluation, a retrospective of his day, and see if there was anything that he would reproach himself about, to see how he could fix it, and if he couldn't, what could he learn from it so that he wouldn't repeat it again. And from a positive psychology perspective, I would add that also helpful to reflect on what went well in the day. What are we grateful for? What do we appreciate? And what did we do well during the day, so that we build up a sense of appreciation of our strengths, not just our weaknesses, but also an appreciation of our strengths, and look to develop those further. So getting a balance of reflecting on where we could improve and appreciating where things have gone well and how can we build on that. So children can feel guilt, going back to Professor Peters, and some feel it far more than others. And this may, again, from a Spiritist perspective, this may come from the past, from previous lifetimes. So as an adult, it can help to really listen to the child, to help get them to talk it through and check if the feeling of guilt is appropriate. As often we can feel guilt when it's not appropriate. And again, I would just underline the importance of closing that door quickly if it's not appropriate, if it's disproportionate relative to the the situation. So the adult can help the child to bring some perspective and to rationalize a way forward so that they don't stay stuck in guilt, which could undermine their self-esteem. Again, another way to help is to normalize mistakes. So the child realizes that others make mistakes and the importance of learning to forgive themselves from a young age. Again, I would argue that this is an element of humility, which is a quality that is repeatedly highlighted as a key quality to develop within Spiritism. So teaching the child to make amends so they can let go of the feeling of guilt and learn from the experience so they do differently the next time, that would be an invaluable investment for their future well-being, psychologically and emotionally, as well as spiritually speaking. So in summary, about this fourth habit, Professor Peters talks about talking things through can help us to gain perspective and help stabilize the mind. It's important for the child to learn how to express their feelings, to verbalize it, to develop emotional literacy. It's important to then, once they've expressed it, is to then evaluate it and learn how to rationalize what has happened. It is essential, ideally, as a parent or caregiver, to ring fence talk time with the child to build a strong bond, strong communication channels with the child. So when issues do arise, as they will as they grow, that the relationship is there and the communication is open. And finally, guilt is useful to alert us to our mistakes, but then let it go, take action, either to fix the mistakes or to learn from them. So moving on, Stevan, please, to habit 5, asking for help, which I think is another element of humility, which can be very challenging for many of us, as often it can be felt to be a weakness and sometimes is interpreted by society as a weakness. But in fact, Professor Peters would highlight that this is a strength. Firstly, when we learn when it's best to ask for help, and secondly, to learn what type of help to ask for. So he makes the valid point, asking for help is a great way to learn and to grow. And so while undoubtedly it's good to help children learn to become independent so that they can develop problem-solving skills for themselves and not become too dependent on others or too passive or inactive, it's also, as a balance, it's good to learn how to work as a team and to learn from others as well. So firstly, helping the child to recognize when they need help, and secondly, helping them to learn what type of help to ask for. So the examples he gives in terms of the types of help we can ask for range from sort of what I would call low level to high level. So low level could be, for example, asking for help from somebody to be a sounding board, somebody to discuss things with, just as a sense check, asking somebody to show them what to do, asking somebody to be a mentor, asking somebody to give information, asking for somebody to give more hands-on support, asking for somebody to give an opinion, and then at the high level, asking somebody to actually take over, recognizing the limits of one's ability and knowledge, and recognizing when they need to hand over to somebody who's more adept. What's not on his list, but I would add from a Spiritist perspective, and I hope in this image is coming across, is an additional resource when asking for help is to pray, to connect to the spiritual support that's help, whether it's to God, however we imagine that, to love, to the universe, to life, to one's spirit guide, to the guardian angel, that instilling that behavior, in that reflex in the child, could be doing them a huge favor for later in their life. So that help may come immediately in terms of inspiration, or it may be delayed, it may come through others, it may come through a chance conversation, something that we see in a magazine, a paper, or wherever it may be, but that help can appear in unexpected ways. So already attuning and sensitizing the mind of the child to the fact that they do have spiritual support, and how to start learning that through their thoughts, they can already make that connection. And I know as a child, my grandmother and my mother both did the guardian angel prayer with me every single night, so that it was hardwired in my mind and stood me in great stead later in life. Effectively coming back to Professor Peters, he speaks of how the adult has a great opportunity to help the child to program their computer. Remember, that's the memory bank with appropriate beliefs, to help convince them that sometimes it is good to ask for help. And the kind of beliefs that he suggests that could be helpful to start, you could call them affirmations, to start downloading into the mind of the child, into the memory bank is, and I quote, "Trying things out is good, but it's okay to ask for help." Again, a quote, "Smart people ask for help so they can learn from others." It isn't clever to reinvent the wheel. So why would we want to reinvent the wheel when somebody already has? We could just learn from them. Again, a quote, "Sometimes we can't do something because we haven't learned it yet." So again, with somebody's help, we can learn. Other people can give great ideas, can give great perspective. Sometimes we can avoid mistakes if we ask others for advice. Sharing a task can make it more manageable and even enjoyable. So I think that's a really interesting selection of beliefs and affirmations that could start to lay a foundation for a healthy approach to asking for help. And it reminds me here of hearing that Will Smith, the actor and singer Will Smith, who invested very strongly in his marriage, made it a point that whenever a friend, and often these were kind of celebrity relationships, whenever a friend of his had marriage breakdown and divorce, he would go and visit them in person to ask them about what had gone wrong and what they think they learned from it, so that he could take the learning back into his own relationship, to care for his own marriage, to invest in his own relationship, so that he could learn from the mistakes of others and avoid making the same mistakes, which I thought showed incredible foresight to be open to learning in that way. So back to Professor Peters, a point that he makes repeatedly that is worth highlighting as it's important is that it's best to base success and praise on effort, as that's a good way of improving a child's self-esteem. So repeatedly he makes that. So rather than just focusing on success failure, it's focusing on effort and progress, so that is what is in control of the child. They're not in control of whether they'd succeed or not, for example, in an exam, but what they are in control of is how much they study, how hard they try, and the progress that they can make. So building their self-esteem on what is within their control. So it brings the focus within them, and they can learn from setbacks, and that's a great way to learn. And so seeing setbacks not as a failure, but instead seeing them as experiences that are opportunities to learn and to grow. So developing a much more constructive, growth-oriented mindset. I think as a society, we tend to think in binary terms, in black and white, of success, failure, and learning to develop that growth-oriented mindset, which is about constantly learning that experiences are simply experiences that give us the opportunity to learn. And seeing these situations as a way to discover and to investigate something. So trying out a new sport, piano, arts, etc. so that they don't see themselves as good or bad, but they see themselves where they are, and that with practice they will get better and better. There's much more in this chapter that there isn't time to touch on, about how to develop problem-solving skills, how to develop critical thinking, how to ask the right types of questions. I'd strongly recommend reading the book. But coming back to that final point again around prayer as a resource for asking for help, for carers or parents who are spiritually minded, this is a really powerful source of help to start training in the child. As we know in the Gospel according to Spiritism, they say that through prayer we obtain the help of good spirits who come to help us in our good resolutions and to inspire wholesome ideas. In this way, we gain the moral strength necessary to be able to overcome our difficulties. And so focusing on an idea that's good and purely intentioned, directing it to the good spirit that watches over us, and using willpower, giving force to that thought, like a ball. So the ball is the idea, choose the direction to a good spirit, and thirdly, to throw it strongly into the spiritual atmosphere, to direct it towards that spirit, so that, you know, maybe using that metaphor like throwing a ball or shooting an arrow could be just a thought that I had to help bring it to life, or showing an image like this to show that electromagnetic connection across the ether that we don't see, but that science is beginning to discover is there. And so we're halfway through the habits, and just the next slide is just a small pause to show, if you could move on, just to be gentle with ourselves while we learn, because as a parent or a caregiver, it may well be that these are areas that we also need to learn and grow and develop in ourselves, because the best way of teaching is to be a role model. And so it really is a challenge and an opportunity for the adult in the child's life to work on these habits. And so being gentle with ourselves, being gentle with the child, firm when appropriate, but being understanding and gentle, that learning takes time. It involves a lot of patience and perseverance. So moving on to the next habit, habit 6, thanks, which deals with good manners. Professor Peters highlights that politeness and manners are usually something that are developed early in life, and the child can learn an awful lot from the adults in their life. And so parents, caregivers around them are role models, whether they realize it or not, whether they want to be it or not, because children will naturally imitate what they see. And so explaining to a child why we are behaving the way we are can help to program their computers with appropriate beliefs. So being a role model, role modeling the behaviors, but also explaining why we're choosing to behave in that way will help to develop the computer to download those behaviors. An interesting idea he has is to get the child to draw up a list of good behaviors so that they take ownership of this habit. And some examples he gives is learning to say thank you, learning to show appreciation, learning to use please and to be polite when they speak, learning to show respect towards others and towards the property of others, learning to not be selfish and greedy, instead learning to be selfless and generous, learning to be considerate, learning to put others first, learning to offer help to those that need it, learning not to offend others. By contrast, in fact, learning to give compliments rather than making unpleasant or offensive remarks, making pleasant remarks and complimenting and, where appropriate, praising. Learning not to gossip, but learning instead to ideally speak well of others. and learning to respect cultural norms. And there in Spiritism, there is a book called Amongst Brothers of Other Lands, which was written by Chico Xavier when he was on a visit to the US. It's a very interesting book that talks about the importance of respecting the norms of the culture that we're visiting. And as increasingly we have had access to travel and a mixing of cultures, you know, some of us will have lived in more than one other country. It's certainly something to bear in mind, to appreciate the strengths of each culture and appreciate the differences. So appreciation is a quality that's important for all of us, as we usually tend to take for granted what we have. And certainly, yeah, I think this is something most of us at varying points can be inclined to do, is to take for granted what we have and take for granted who we have as well in our lives. And instead, stopping and appreciating what we do have is very good for our mental and spiritual well-being. And going back to that example of Will Smith, just remembering a piece of research that I saw about successful marriages, and it spoke about looking at the most successful marriages compared to those that ended up in divorce. Considerable body of research done by, I think his name is Gottman, and basically one of the things his research showed, and it was thousands of couples, was appreciation was key in the successful marriages. How much admiration and appreciation of the other person in the couple was a feature in the successful marriages. So learning that at a young age, to show appreciation and be grateful, is an investment in successful relationships for the future. And appreciation is something that's also linked to humility. Helping a child from an early age to focus on what's good in life can also build out a stronger base psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And the spirit guide Emmanuel speaks of this many times in his book, Thought and Life. The book is all about training the mind and developing positive, healthy mental reflexes. And repeatedly he talks about learning to train it so that it becomes an instinct, a reflex, to focus in on what is good, is developing a very healthy, spiritually speaking, a very healthy mind. So helping a child develop good manners gives them, and again, coming back to the ideas of Professor Peters, gives them a set of learned behaviors that will generally lead to approval and positive reactions from others. And from that will help them build a more secure base, a sense of security. By contrast, if they are rude to others and are disrespectful, that will ruin relationships. Whereas by being considerate, it will strengthen them. Rude behavior, he points out, leads to negative outcomes and will lead on to anxiety, because they will start having negative feedback from their peers or from adults, and they'll feel that vibe, they'll hear the reactions, they'll end up developing anxiety. That can end up to feeling sadness and pain in the one who's being rude. And so children who are rude, his observation as a psychiatrist is that they tend to lack confidence and they're defensive. And he makes the valid point that children generally prefer to be praised rather than to be told off or given out to. And so he makes, I think, what for me was a really interesting point, is that children who are rude don't usually intend to be. They actually don't mean it. It's just that they lack the interpersonal skills to manage their chimp, to manage their unconscious reaction, and they lack the ability for their human to take over and answer appropriately. So it hasn't been trained. This is a skill they haven't learned yet. And this can be true of an adult as much as a child, because we inherit what we've developed in our younger years, and from a spiritist perspective, we inherit what we've brought from previous lifetimes. So Professor Peters then says the best thing to do is to talk things through with the child when things have calmed down, because when things have calmed down, they're more receptive, they'll be more able to listen. And in fact, ideally, the best time to talk things through is before anything happens, to preempt any challenging behaviors. So, for example, going to bed at a certain time, talk through with the child in advance why that is important, what the benefits are. So they need sleep, otherwise they'll be tired and cranky the following day. It'll affect their learning, and it probably means that their teacher will start giving out to them and that they'll get into trouble if they're behaving crankily. Or another scenario to practice in advance, to start putting down those beliefs into their memory bank, is practice talking through about why it makes sense to leave the playground at a certain time when the adult decides it's time to leave, or to leave the beach, or when to leave a party, etc., so that the child is already beginning to internalize appropriate and more mature beliefs. So explaining to them the consequences of behaving badly to help them understand, and also explaining the positive consequences of behaving well. So this, I think, pulling back in terms of looking at good manners and being considerate in relationship with others, made me think of the golden rule, which, you know, is something that we see in Spiritism, and in fact we see across all the spiritual traditions, which is to do to others as we would have them do to us. That we would hope that they would treat us well, and to gradually over time learn to treat them with the respect and consideration that we would want. So moving on to habit 7, to try new things. So here we see a very happy young camper embracing his broccoli, which is wonderful to see. At his age, I wasn't a huge fan of broccoli, but I have grown to love it. And so Professor Peters speaks about the importance of encouraging a child to try out new things and to praise them for trying them out. So praise them for trying, not for achieving. Again, he highlights and underlines the importance of that. It's about making the effort. It's not about succeeding or achieving. By praising them for trying things, that is good for their self-confidence when they're applauded for trying. So an important thought for the parent or the caregiver, the adult, to not lose sight of is, don't forget why we're encouraging a child to start something new. So, for example, if encouraging a child to start a sport because it's seen that it's healthy, it's good to learn how to be part of a team, how to operate within a team. It's good to learn self-discipline. It's good to learn how to win and to lose. It's good for psychological and social development. What can happen, though, is starting out with very positive intentions, these goals can get forgotten because the adult can start getting caught up because of their cultural conditioning, get caught up in winning, and then winning can become the goal. And that then puts pressure on the child rather than the joy of taking part and learning from the experience. Another example could be trying out new food, green vegetables, for example. So explaining to the child why it's good for them helps to download new software into the computer with healthy beliefs. So, for example, getting them to know that spinach will help them to be stronger, and maybe showing them some old cartoons from Popeye where he would swallow the spinach, a can of spinach. Of course, now we would hope it would be fresh and possibly even organic. And then you would see the huge muscles coming up in his arms. So downloading that belief, that connection, that association in the mind of the child that spinach makes me stronger. And if I want to be good at sports, I need to eat my spinach. So start building positive associations. Another point he makes is growing food at home or in school can be a great way of breaking down resistance to healthy eating and of building positive, healthy habits for life. So that kind of unprocessed, healthy food with low miles is something that is very good for physical, but also for mental well-being. And so supporting children to try out new things can help build confidence, can help build independence and autonomy. He then explores the blocks that the child may have to trying new things out. And so commonly that could be a fear of failure, which could come from the past. So we'll find some children are much more open to trying new things. Others may be much more reluctant, and that could come from having had failures in the past. Talking again from a spiritist perspective, from previous lifetimes. They may have low confidence, low self-esteem. They may have perfectionistic tendencies. They may have excessive worries about performance. And so usually these worries are centered around what others will think. And so he suggests to ask the child to imagine that they're on a desert island and nobody can see the results. And then ask, would they be afraid then of trying things out? So encouraging them to just focus on purely the task at hand or the opportunity at hand. And so the adult can help program the child's computer to be more open and to develop more up-to-date responses that will reprogram the beliefs that they will have brought from the past. He makes a very valid point that the opinions and the approval of a parent or adults are hugely important for a child. And this is a really great opportunity to praise them for trying their best, for having the courage to give it a go. And winning and achieving is one thing, and it's great to have. So it's not to ignore the joy of winning, but ultimately to download in the mind of the child, and I would argue the adult, that ultimately the true measure of success is that we did our best. And a lovely example came to mind here when, the Spanish Nadal, the Spanish tennis player whose coach certainly was, and I think still is, his uncle. And he wanted to change his game. He had a particular way of playing that he was in his comfort zone. It worked for him, but in order to go to the next level, he needed to start moving from the baseline into the net. I think that was it. And so his coach, his uncle, started working with him to start developing a habit of going into the net, of learning to take that risk where you're much more exposed, but potentially you can win faster. And in the US Open, for the first time in a Grand Slam event, he started to bring this into his game. And he talks about how when he first did it, he went into the net, and I won't say he messed up, it didn't work. And his instinctive reaction was extreme disappointment and frustration. And he looked up into the seats where his uncle was, his coach, and just with frustration. And his uncle stood up and he clapped him. And he went, "Bravo, well done, you gave it a try. In the hot seat, you actually gave it a try. Well done, you'll get it next time." And what a great way to start encouraging him to trying out new behaviors. It's inevitable we won't win the first time, that we won't succeed the first time if we're changing a habit. But that encouragement to just praise the effort of taking the risk of trying out something new. So in different people's lives, that will be different things. It may be to speak in public. It may be deeply uncomfortable, but to appreciate that the person has made that effort, or for the person themselves to appreciate the fact that they've made that effort, even if it didn't go as they would have hoped. The fact they've taken that first step is an achievement. So it's about progress. And I thought that was a really strong and powerfully positive example. So, and so developing that kind of thinking in a child so that they don't have to learn it as an adult, I think would be doing them a huge favor for the future, so that they're much more open. Because from a spiritist perspective, life is about progress. It's about evolution. And we can accelerate our evolution by making choices to try out new things that could help us to grow in positive directions. So just a couple of things to close off on. Perfectionism is one area that Professor Peters addresses. He talks about the chimp's view is that success is perfection, which is completely unrealistic, and anything less than perfection is failure, which is utterly unrealistic. And inevitably, that will lead to frustration, to anger, and feeling upset despite the best efforts that we may have made. So perfectionism is a real obstacle and challenge for us, and particularly for those with sensitive mediumship in particular. And so, again, I'm talking from a spiritist perspective, obviously, because Professor Peters does not speak about mediumship. So the advice of Professor Peters is to harness the chimp's drive for perfection, but then switch into the human mode that accepts when we have done our best and couldn't have done more than that, and to appreciate that we've done our best. So it's not to ignore the chimp's desire for perfection, it's to use it to do our best, but to then recognize, okay, I've done my best. And to feel proud of doing our best, to feel good about ourselves for having done our best, and to instill that belief in the child. So again, that's really positive for their self-esteem, because that is what is in their control. Doing their best is in their control. How that will rank relative to other external expectations is not in their control. He also makes the point that reassurance, encouragement, and praise can really help the child to internalize that way of thinking within themselves. So developing that voice, that self-talk within them, and bring it into adulthood, so that they will be more courageous in trying out new things. They'll be more reassuring to themselves, more encouraging, and then praise themselves for making the steps, making the efforts. So I gave the example of, giving a talk, speaking in public, moving country, trying out a new sport, trying out a new instrument, a musical instrument, trying art, whatever it may be. And so, again, to underline this point, that in Spiritism, we know that we are eternal beings, immortal beings. We have lived many lifetimes before. We are reborn to learn, to grow and to progress through each new experience. And so being open to trying new things, yes, be discerning in what those choices are, but nevertheless, when we do discern what could be positive choices for our growth, to embrace those opportunities, and that is entirely consistent with this habit of being open to trying new things. So developing a mindset that embraces change, that's open to change and new experiences, is a healthy way of being and can help us to grow, so that we can optimize our evolutionary path. And so I think at this point, I'll stop, and we can pick up on the last few habits next week on Thursday, I think. So thank you, Stevan, very much for running through the slides there.
Okay, thank you very much, my dear friend. Yes, we just realizing that we have a lot of good feedbacks from Tanya's talk, and there are many requests about doing a Q&A session. So we will hold this Q&A session next Thursday. Let me see the date. I think it's the 4th of March. No, 25th of March. 25th of February, sorry. So next Thursday, we will have the complement for the session 8 to 10, half of the show, and the other half we will open for a Q&A session. Okay, so I want to say thank you. We have a lot of compliments here. Bobby saying, take nothing for granted, be grateful for everything. That's it, my friend. Kaká say again, great talk, Tanya. Thank you. Edir Paixão, congrats from Brazil. So we had Jersey. So a lot of people here.
Speak.
Yeah, a lot of people here saying you, and thank you very much for the wonderful and amazing research you have done to give this talk to us. So thank you very much.
Well, I wish I could claim credit, but none of it is original. I'm purely relaying the amazing research of Professor Peters.
Yeah, you spend time to read it, to make the connection with the Spiritism, and courage to be here and expose your findings. So this is priceless. To be honest, this is priceless. But again, thank you very much. I will, we did it last week. So Tanya, would you mind to do the final prayer?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, great.
And just in terms of the Q&A next week, obviously delighted to get the chance to discuss people's thoughts from this material. I would just share that I am not a psychologist. I don't have a psychological background. I'm relaying the ideas from this, and so between Stevan and I, we'll answer to the best of our abilities. But let's see how we go. So it's just to manage expectations.
Yes.
For the Q&A next week. So let's lift our minds and make that connection to the spirit guide that each one of us is blessed with. Grateful to know that they're there. Grateful for their support throughout our lives. We pray that we open more to their suggestions, to their inspiration, so that they could be like a parent or an older brother or sister, passing on the benefit of their more advanced understanding of life and the opportunities that it can send. That what we see as challenges, they would see as opportunities. That they would wish to transform the way we see things in a much more positive light, and would help dissuade us from the things that potentially, without us realizing, could cause us harm, or that could distract us from our growth, from our development, and from the opportunities that this life can bring. May each one of us learn to internalize a more positive, constructive, supportive, encouraging self-talk, so that we nurture ourselves and encourage ourselves to grow, to flourish, and to embrace the changes that life sends, to embrace the challenges and opportunities that life sends. May we learn to be more nurturing with those around us, to be considerate, to be kind, to know when to ask for help, and to know what help to ask for, to quickly undo where we make mistakes, not just to say sorry, but to find ways of undoing it. In short, to start learning how to put these positive habits and so many others into practice. And may we learn to celebrate the little steps that collectively, accumulatively add up into real progress, so that for each one, by the end of this lifetime, that we can see that we have made progress, that we have improved, and that we re-enter the spiritual world with a sense of true achievement, spiritual achievement, that we've improved in developing better and better qualities, within us. We pray that your love go out to all those who are working on the front line. Please sustain them. Send them the love and support that they need, the inspiration that they need, and inspire us all to help to stay safe so as to remove the pressure from them. Inspire those who are leading in healthcare, in government, and elsewhere at different levels of society to make good decisions, enlightened decisions, so as to protect the well-being of the people that they're responsible for. And we pray for inspiration on the rollout of vaccines so that it may be fair, that it may be equitable, and may be as effective as it possibly can be, that it may be optimized. And we give thanks for that immense gift of hope and of healing that is already underway, for the great spiritual support that has helped that to develop as quickly and as well as it has done. Amen.
Amen. Okay, y'all. Thank you very much. I'll see you next Tuesday. Have a great day, and God bless you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.